There has also been great shortcoming of real, sincere, and constant endeavors to preserve the worship of God, public and private. Quote, in times of hazard, many ministers left off preaching and people hearing. We have been negligent and remiss in family worship, and instead of preserving, many have done much to discourage and hinder it. And in secret, we have been formal and careless. Many have satisfied themselves with the purity of the ordinances, neglecting the power thereof. Yea, some have turned aside to crooked ways, destructive to both. Unquote. Neither have we been careful to preserve the discipline, church censures being laid aside and not impartially exercised against scandals, personal and public. Scandalous persons being admitted to hold up their children to baptism and to partake of the Lord's table and other privileges of the church without respect to the rules of Christ. The discipline of the church hath also been circumscribed, limited, and bounded by acts of Parliament, and is now rendered ineffectual by the late Act of the British Parliament instituted Act for preventing the disturbing of those of the Episcopal Communion in that part of Great Britain called Scotland, so that ministers could not, without transgressing these acts, which they too punctually observe, draw out the sword of discipline against many covenant breakers, perjured hireling curates being allowed to enjoy churches and benefices without censure or molestation, and subject to the civil government, as is evident from the 27th Act of the 5th Session of William's First Parliament, entitled Act Concerning the Church. Ministers have neglected to draw out the sword of discipline, duly and impartially, against scandalous persons of every rank and quality, so that many gross offenders have been passed over without censure, as namely such as shed the blood of the Lord's people, complied with the tyrants and usurpers in the times of persecution, by testing, bonding, hearing of curates, paying of cess and other taxations, intelligencers and informers against the people of God, acceptors of indulgences and toleration, and such as preached under the covert of remissions and indemnities brought by sums of money from the council. Such as have been lax and negligent in testifying against the corruptions of the times were not brought to an acknowledgement of it, but upon the contrary encouraged as well-doers, and advanced to office and public employment in the church, without evident signs of repentance. And many other scandalous persons are daily connived at and superficially passed, without sufficient discoveries of their repentance and amendment. Many also have been overlooked because of their eminency in the world, or passed over for peculiar mollucts. And whereas, in the same first article of the Solemn League, we are bound, quote, to endeavor the promoting and propagating of the Reformation and uniformity in religion, confession of faith, form of church government, which, as it was primarily understood, so still we own to be only presbyterial, directory for worship and catechizing, according to the Scriptures, unquote. Isaiah 19, verse 18, quote, in that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan, and swear to the Lord of hosts, unquote. Jeremiah 32, verse 39, quote, and I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever, for the good of them and of their children after them, unquote. Zechariah 14, verse 9, quote, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day there shall be one Lord, and his name one, unquote. Acts 2, verse 46, quote, and they continued daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread, from house to house did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, unquote. Acts 4, verse 32, quote, and the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and one soul, unquote. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 17, quote, but as God hath distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called every one, so let him walk, and so ordain I in all churches, unquote. Galatians 6, verse 16, quote, as many as walk according to this rule, peace be on them and mercy, and upon the Israel of God, unquote. Philippians 3, verse 16, quote, nevertheless, whereunto we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule, let us mind the same thing, unquote. Yet as our fathers had reason to complain, quote, that the profane, loose, and insolent carriage of many in their armies, who went to the assistance of their brethren in England, and the tamperings and unstraight dealings of some commissioners and others of our nation in London, the Isle of Wight, and other places, had proved great lets to the work of reformation and settling of kirk government there, whereby error and schism in that land had been greatly increased, and sectaries hardened in their way, unquote. So much more during the time of the late persecution, the offensive carriage of many who went to England is to be bewailed, who proved very stumbling to the secretaries there. There hath been little zeal or endeavor for such an uniformity, little praying for it, or mourning over the obstructions of it, but upon the contrary a toleration was embraced, introductive of a sectarian multiformity of religion, without a testimony against the toleration, even of popery itself, under the usurper James Duke of York. And since the Revolution, the land hath done exceeding much to harden them. First, by accepting such persons to the royal dignity over this realm, as had sworn to maintain the anti-Christian hierarchy of prelacy with all the superstitions and ceremonies of the Church of England, and who countenance a multiformity in the worship of God and government of the Church, and do not suppress such as are unsound and heterodox in the fundamental articles of the Christian faith. And next, to put a full stop to all endeavors of uniformity and union in the Lord's way, and to bring the nation under an indispensable necessity of covenant breaking. This nation hath entered into an incorporating union with England in such terms, and upon such conditions as formally and explicitly established prelacy, as the church government there, to all succeeding generations, and that while, in the meantime, all manner of sectarian errors are there encouraged, maintained, and supported by means of a toleration, by the concluding of which union, this land hath said upon the matter, that there is no obligation upon us to tender the advancement of religion in that nation, or to study such means and methods as might tend to bring them to a sense of their breach of covenant, or reduce them to a performance of the duties whereunto they are engaged. And thus this land hath hardened them in their first sinful ways and courses, contrary to this solemn league, and given them ground to think that we look upon the obligation thereof to be loosed. This land hath been wanting in compassion to them as brethren, in not laboring to show them their sin and danger, while persisting in a professed violation of their vows, and refusing them help in their need, when supplication was made by some of them to the first assembly after the Revolution for ministers to preach the gospel. And though this land hath sought out methods how to entertain amity and friendship with them, yet have they not endeavored to have it such as that the Lord should, upon that account, delight to dwell amongst us. Nay, upon the contrary, unless these methods be repented of and forsaken, it is impossible that Reformation should ever amount to that degree of perfection in these kingdoms to which, through the mercy of God, it once arrived, so that instead of living together in peace and love, we and our posterity after us are like to live in a joint defection from our covenant engagements made to the Most High God. In the second article of the Solemn League and Covenant we swear, quote, that we shall, without respect of persons, endeavor the extirpation of popery, prelacy, superstition, heresy, schism, profaneness, and whatsoever shall be found to be contrary to sound doctrine and the power of godliness. And in the National Covenant to abhor and detest that anti-Christian wicked hierarchy, etc., according to Scriptures, unquote. Exodus 23, verses 32 and 33, quote, Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. Thou shalt not dwell in thy land. They shall not dwell in thy land, lest they make thee sin against me. For if thou serve their gods, it will surely be a snare unto thee, unquote. Exodus 34, verses 12 and 13, quote, Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee. But ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. Deuteronomy chapter 13 throughout. Judges 2, verse 2, quote, And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, unquote. Zechariah 13, verses 2 and 3, quote, And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land, and they shall be no more remembered. And also I will cause the prophets and the unclean spirits to pass out of the land. And it shall come to pass that when any shall yet prophesy, then his father and his mother that begat him shall say unto him, Thou shalt not live, for thou speakest lies in the name of the Lord. And his father and his mother that begat him shall thrust him through when he prophesieth, unquote. 1 Timothy 4, verses 1, 2, and 3, quote, Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with an hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe, and know the truth, unquote. Revelation 17, verse 5, quote, And upon her forehead was the great name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Verse 16, And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire, unquote. Compared with Revelation 18, verses 4, 5, and 6, quote, And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double, according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double." Unquote. Yet alas, so far has the land been defective in this, that upon the contrary it hath been polluted with idolatrous masses. Altars and other monuments of idolatry were suffered again to be erected. The penal statutes were disabled, stopped, and suspended by an absolute arbitrary power, by means of a toleration in its own nature tending, and in its design intending, to introduce popery and slavery, which yet was accepted and addressed for by many backslidden ministers, who to this day have made no public acknowledgement of the sin of so doing, notwithstanding all the Reformation which is bragged of, and was countenanced, complied, and concurred with by many people without a testimony or endeavor to withstand it. Yea, the administration of the government and the greatest offices of power and trust were committed into, and permitted to abide, in the hands of papists, and the head of them, and great pillar and promoter of popery, James the Seventh, was owned as king, contrary to the laws of God and man, and covenant obligations, without respect of persons, to extirpate popery and papists, and few during that time evidenced any just zeal or indignation against, or fear of the manifest appearances of the coming in of popery, and intended establishment of it in the land. And not only then, but even to this day, there is too much conniving at papists. The laws are not put in execution against them in their full extent and latitude, and albeit this land, yea, whole Britain and Ireland, were purged of popery, yet cannot we be said to have made conscience of performing this part of the oath of God, while there is a confederating with papists abroad, and fighting in their quarrel, and that, whilst in the meantime they are persecuting with the height of rigor and severity all such as profess anything of the Reformed religion in their dominions. And as there hath been great failures in respect of extirpating popery, so especially in the performance of that part of the covenant which binds us to the extirpation of prelacy. Quote, "Church government by archbishops, bishops, their chancellors and commissaries, deans and chapters, archdeacons, and all other officers depending upon that hierarchy. There hath been a most wilful and palpable violation of the oath of God, though it be most clearly our duty prescribed in his word." Matthew 20, verses 25 and 26, quote, "But Jesus called them unto him, and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. But it shall not be so among you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister." Unquote. Luke 22, verses 25 and 26. "And he said unto them, The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them," unquote, etc. Acts 29, verse 17, quote, "And from Miletus he sent to Ephesus, and called the elders of the church," compared with verse 28. "Take heed therefore unto yourselves and to all the flock over which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers," bishops, "to feed the church of God, which he hath purchased with his own blood," unquote. 1 Peter 5, verse 3, quote, "Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being ensamples to the flock," unquote. 3 John, verse 9, quote, "I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loved to have the preeminence among them, received us not," unquote.